All right, everybody. It is already March. We will do the business committee meeting for March. We'll get it going here. So first things first, Mr. Swirsky, we have a staffing report with action items. Any question? Oh yeah, we got to do roll call? No, not for committee. Okay, thanks.
He is coming. I did talk to him earlier.
So staffing report.
Okay, so on the staffing report action items, pretty standard here. I just will mention that we have certified resignations for Dr. Carey and then for Amy Starzecki on there, and we wish them all the best and would like to not be losing them, but their careers are calling them.
All right, and then moving on to action items.
Yes. Okay. This will eventually become. It'll have a resolution number. It's the contract for the food service employees. It's a 3-year contract. I did send it out early this morning, so I don't know if you've had a chance. I did highlight what the changes were in that contract, and it's very minimal. The main thing on it, I believe, would be the increases, which are the 1, 1.5, and 2, which are within the parameters set by the board. I believe my understanding is they'll be voting on it this week. So normally I don't send them out till we know that they've ratified it, but I don't want to miss the meeting either and not have a chance to talk about it. There's nothing real startling on it.
I contacted Tim about this contract, and he did review with me some of the language, the new language in there at the end, and it might be interesting to the rest of the board, that new language and why it's we're going to be seeing more of it with our unions.
Yeah, on Article 30 now, most of our other contracts have an access to premises kind of language in it, and this one didn't. I don't know if any of you have been following the Janus case right now, which is going to, I believe, the Supreme Court. And basically the basis of that court case is memberships in the unions, and can you require them to pay dues, and do their dues go to political aspects of the unions and fair share of full share members. There was a more concerted effort in mainly all of our negotiations to have more specific language as to unions having access to the buildings and to the employees and premises. The premises is not a problem, and to employees when they are not on work status, either on their lunch breaks or before or after, that's pretty standard, and we've always gone by that. The concerns, and I'm not trying to speak for the unions on here, but my understanding is some of this language has been trying to get inserted into contracts, so even if Janus is successful in their case, that they will have access to employees. As far as I'm concerned, as a district, we're neutral on that. We're not pro against it, but what I don't want to do is put language in a contract that is going to bind future school district negotiations into some of this meeting that we may or may not want to have, barring the outcome of this case. So this is fairly standard language that we've had in our other contracts, and that's what we've added to this one.
Thank you. I'm glad we have it in it.
And it looks like there are no further informational items. Future items, any comments on those?
I believe the group has gotten together at least one time on the superintendent's review. And then we will be meeting with Member Oswald. Still, we have to set up our time to continue on our hourly wage for our hourly employees.
Sounds good. All right, that's a wrap on the HR committee meeting. Oh, sorry, Sally.
That's okay. This is going back to the staffing report action items, recognizing that we have a school psychologist leaving, and there's some filling in. It looks like that's happening until the end of March. And we know that school psychologists we need them in our schools. So just kind of curious about if you could walk me through maybe the process of what the plan is to try and fill that position.
I can.
Okay.
We have posted a .6 position, and we do have basically some people interested. What the special services area is doing right now is they're looking at their budgets for the remainder of the year and their budgets into next year, and are they better off doing this with the overloads versus bringing a person in, and how we're going to provide services for next year.
If I could continue, I just want to clarify the role of psychologists, counselors, and social workers. Psychologists work within our special education system, and their task is primarily IEP review and assessments for special education identification. So that's separate from the one-on-one more therapy type sessions. So their role's a little bit different. But still important. But I wasn't sure if you were...
I was just curious about the process.
Okay. Yep. If I could continue on a different topic.
Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to Dr. Carey and Assistant Superintendent Starzecki's positions. I agree. Now that she's in the room, I'll say nice things about her. I agree that I'm excited for them to take the next step in their career, but it's certainly a loss for us. Both of them have done significant work in the school district to move us along farther towards our goals. We understand how important the transition is, and I have been working with both Dr. Carey and Assistant Superintendent Starzecki on some transition plans. Have had conversations with board leadership, with principals, with cabinet members, and with both of them as far as the possibility of changing their roles, this being an opportunity to review that. And after all those conversations, we kind of decided that we're making really good progress with the roles that we have. There isn't that much of a financial difference in changing those roles right now, and so we're going to continue those roles. You can count on us posting those relatively soon. We just want to review the job descriptions and then post those positions. There has been some interest internally as well as externally, and so we're looking forward to identifying people for those roles relatively soon so that we can have some transition time with Amy and Mike as well.
Just to follow up to that, can you review who will be involved with the interview process for those positions?
We haven't identified that team yet. Generally, it is myself as well as a representative from cabinet, and very often from the principals or teachers units as well. Principals units because the assistant superintendent is the direct supervisor of principals, and then teachers with the director of curriculum position because they work very closely with them as well. So teams might be a little different for both positions, but will be a smaller team approach.
Anything else? Seeing none.
Me.
Sorry, Alana. Look too quick.
Me. Okay. Just to follow up on that, I know that I have had conversations with members of the NAACP and the Education Equity Advisory Community Group Committee that has sort of formed from the comp ed discussion, and they both have asked and will be requesting that they be allowed to provide some input on who is hired also. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm just forwarding their message, and I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you at some point because they would like to be involved in the hiring process.
All right, any further I'm not missing anyone this time, am I? All right. That concludes the HR committee for March 2018.
Great, and then we'll open the business committee for March 12th. This is a doozy of a discussion tonight, so I'm going to ask for patience as we go through this, because there's a lot of moving pieces that fall under a variety of these different reports. And so we'll start off with the financial report. Before Doug gets into that, I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing around kind of streamlining some of the financial reports for ease of understanding, as well as for just kind of giving us what it is that we are asking for and what we need. So thank you for taking time to modify those. And I think, speaking on behalf of all of us, if there are continued modifications you'd like to see made, please feel free to pass those along. But thank you for your efforts thus far.
You're welcome, and I want to emphasize just what you said in terms of I'm open to input and comment that the board members would have. This is I don't know the last time the school district might have made a significant change in the financial reporting, so this is a different structure, a different format. I hope you like it. If you don't like it, I'd welcome your input, and I kind of would hold open that we may see some tweaks in that format in the months ahead, as we endeavor to provide the board with the best information about our current financial status on a month-to-month basis. Moving through the financial report, I would drop down, welcome any questions between A and F, but I would also give attention to our monthly APU PU projection report. We continue to see enrollments above levels that we have seen in recent years. I went back this afternoon and looked at the March 2017 report and compared that to what we are reporting to you today, and we are showing a total additional pupil units amount that's 134 students greater this year than last year. One of the basics that we all understand is that funding follows the student, and to the extent that we are showing some growth this year, that is a very beneficial component of our financial operations, and I'm hoping that trend will continue into the future. But I did want to give highlight to at least where we are through the end of March.
Can I ask a question on that? Mm-hmm. How will that impact our budget this year?
How does this impact the fiscal year 19 or the fiscal year 18?
This year.
The fiscal year 18, to the extent that this is a higher enrollment than what we anticipated, we are accruing additional state revenues within our current year budget. That is something that Peggy, myself, and the superintendent have been tracking and attempting to update all of our budgets to reflect what we are anticipating. One of the real challenges with the way we count students and fund schools in the state of Minnesota is I kind of like these numbers at the end of March, and that's great, but those are not the official numbers. It's all ultimately going to get balanced out based on what effectively our average student enrollment is through the end of the year. Now, it's March. We're most of the way through the end of the year, so pretty safe to assume that, yes, the trend that we've had year to date has been positive, and not sure what's going to happen on a month-to-month basis as we track out through the remainder of the year. But I think it's fair for us to assume we are going to be up, and that will translate into additional revenues. And we will try to be able to present that to you in a format that really highlights what we anticipated in terms of revenue this year and what we're getting now. And I can tell you, certainly compared to fiscal year 17, our fiscal year 18 state funding has certainly stepped up as a result of these enrollment increases.
So that means that the deficit that we're looking at carrying forward will be smaller if these numbers hold through the end of the year.
That is true, and that's a very significant number in our budgetary process that we've been looking at this year. And as we continue to clarify what our enrollment is likely to be through the end of the year, my objective is to evaluate whether or not that deficit that we have projected for some period of time now, whether or not that should continue to be the deficit we're tracking, or whether or not it should be adjusted in accordance with new information.
I did. I just wanted to say, we're hoping those revenues are going to be higher, and we've also made reductions, and so we're hoping that those that are end of the year expenditures will be slightly lower than we track to. So this conversation will have some implications for the conversation about the budget that's coming up, but we don't know the answer yet. So.
Yep, two things. I had, with some of the information we got over the weekend, that was one of my questions, was just getting accurate numbers from our principals of what our class sizes are right now and what our numbers are right now. So, Doug, I actually didn't direct that question to you. I directed it to the superintendent. So I will look forward to having more specifics there. When you look back onto March of 2017 compared to this year, where did you see the most increase, I guess, where students, elementary, middle, or high school?
Hold the phone. The format that we work with here starts in the upper left of the page where it's just a head count, okay? So a year ago at this time, for the first line item, KG, kindergarten, we were showing 548 students. This year, through the end of March, we're showing 611. We're up in the next count, which is also a kindergarten-related count, 74 to 51. So we have growth from the very beginning in kindergarten, which is a great place to see that growth, as you kind of like to make the assumption if they start out with us, they will continue with us. We're down a little bit in grades 1 through 3. We are up a little bit in grades 4 through 6. I'm looking at last year's document and comparing it to this year. I can track down the page for you if you'd like. A year ago in March, we had 548 students reflected for the kindergarten in the top left. We had 51 students for the HK column. We had 1,942 in grades 1 through 3, so you can see we are down a little bit there. In grade 4 through 6, a year ago, we had 1,755 students. So we are up there in grade 4 through 6. In grade 7 and 8, we had 1,161 students. So we're up there as well. And it's close to a wash. We had 2,733 in grades 9 through 12, so we're down a little bit relative to that. So I'd say we start out with good growth in the kindergarten. Grades 1 through 3 is a little bit down, but solid from grade 4 through 8. In enrollment's what it's all about. So that is critical to our funding, and what else can I say?
Just a request, given that we're going to be looking through a lot of pages of financial documents today. If you could cite what page you're looking at, whether you're asking a question or giving an answer, I think that would help us all. Or if it's a separate document, because I know we received a lot of different documents that might not be part of the board book, that would be really helpful so that we can follow along. Thank you.
At this point, I would come to the end of the financial report section. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to address those at this time.
Not sure this is exactly all that, but your last comments about enrollment and where we see growth and where we see, maybe some dips. It's, that 9 through 12 piece where we tend to see maybe some decline. One, we do hope we can keep our pre-K and our early elementary and middle school students in our district, but with online academies and a variety of options at the 9 through 12, I'm interested too in what our budget is addressing for marketing strategies, and I think I saw a decrease, and that concerns me, and it concerned me through my campaign as well, that our effort to communicate with our communities the great benefits of being in the Duluth Public Schools isn't as effective as it could be, and if enrollment is critical to our budget and to our success, that I would really like to see more marketing that's really targeted. I know we're great at sharing our successes in our newspapers, in our online ISD website, but that's not getting to the community that we need it to. So I'd like to see us talk about that in our journey here in the next months.
I just wanted to speak to some of the differences too in the numbers. It's almost like we have 3 different sets to look at, because as the parochial and private and charter schools age out, so some of them go to 5th grade, so we see a bump in 6th grade because there's fewer options. We see that again at 9th grade because some of those options age out when they're done with 8th grade, and so they're making another choice at 9th grade. That's some of the reason that we do a lot of transition work at 6th grade and 9th grade, especially with our marketing and our reaching out to kids of those ages, because it is when we see bumps in enrollment when families are making new choices.
I'd be prepared to move forward into the bids section.
Sounds good.
If that's okay?
Yep.
We have a number of bids that are related to some technology acquisitions. These are all bids that have gone through the process that is wrapped around the E-rate funding program, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. School districts all over the countries and libraries, and I'm not quite sure who else participates in E-rate, but E-rate is a federally funded program that allows school districts to acquire technology with funds that reduce our cost. So E-rate, whenever it is available to us, is really a great opportunity. We are able to make these purchases for less than we would otherwise be able to. So specifically, we have bids for a wireless network controller, for a metropolitan area network and ISP services, and a core switch. We are showing also a next generation firewall. I wasn't sure if that was going to be a placeholder, but all those bids have been completed previously. The bid process for E-rate is highly regulated. It's a process over and above what the state of Minnesota would otherwise require. It's a rather cumbersome process for us to go through, but the end result is that we are able to make these acquisitions for less than 100% of the purchase price. And around our school district, it's very critical that we stay as current as we can be with these systems, so that our network systems are operating and functioning to the level that our staff and our students require.
I have a couple questions about this. We work with USAC quite a bit with our work as well. So just for, in terms of the percentage or the rebate, I guess, that you get back, do you have a rough estimate of what that is just for, is it like 60% of the total expenditure, or does it depend on how many people apply for the funding?
Right now, we're at a level of 60%.
Okay.
So we'll pay 40% on these amounts.
And do you apply every year, 2 years or 3 years?
It depends. Every year we have to do our 471s for the E-rate, the existing bids. But this year was for our MAN and ISP, that was a renewal.
Okay.
So that's going for a 2-year, and it just came off of a 3-year. And
Okay.
other stuff is Category 2, which is hardware. So that's, we have a 5-year program on that.
Okay.
The federal government has.
And then looking at those bids, some of them were clear how many years the price would hold, and some weren't. So if you have to do a bid every year, so we can't necessarily project out 3-year cost projections if we have to apply every year, right?
Correct.
Any other questions on those bids? If not, we are going to be moving into the policies and regulations section. We have a number of policies that are showing up here on second reading. That would begin with new bylaw 204. It would incorporate deletion of policy 8090, deletion of policy 8095, deletion of policy 8110, deleting policies 9105 and 9110. All of those policies that are specified for deletion are policies that are effectively incorporated into the MSBA model policy under bylaw 204. So those are all up on second reading. We're also coming to the board with a proposed new policy, 108, data request policy. You might recall back in November of 2017, this policy was on the board agenda at that time. The Minnesota School Boards Association was in the process of updating that policy, and the consensus of the board was that we hold off on acting on our data request policy until the MSBA policy was released. We had expectation that that was going to happen before the end of calendar year 2017, so we waited anxiously. That policy was not released before year end. We remained optimistic that it would be released soon, and we have checked back a number of times and continued to be told that they are not ready to release it yet. So working with board leadership, have made the judgment that we really do want to get the ball rolling on establishing that policy, getting that in place. Had hoped that we would be able to do so on the basis of the MSBA framework. The framework that is being used for this policy is a framework that has been developed by the Minnesota State Department of Administration, which oversees the data request statute and procedures in the state of Minnesota. So we're not going into this blind. Again, it would be ideal if we would be able to work through the MSBA model policy, but at a certain point in time, we felt like we needed to move forward with that. Now, we do have a policy. It is outdated. We do have a policy 1016 concerning information requests. Given that the statutes have changed through the years to the point that that prior policy really wasn't tracking with that statute, that's why we were proposing the new policy, policy 108, and I would welcome board input in terms of what you see in that policy.
I actually have a question about the prior policy and this policy, so which one do you want me to address first?
Whichever you'd like.
Well, if you can go to page 27, under 4A, the policy, the MSBA policy reads, "The school board shall cause its official proceedings to be published once in the official newspaper of the school district within 30 days of the meeting at which the proceedings occurred." Does that happen?
So you're referencing
For
204? Are you on policy 204?
I am
Okay.
the new school board meeting minutes. And under the section 4 on page 27, the first paragraph, letter A.
No, it doesn't.
So does that make any sense to have that in there? Or should we describe how it does happen? Or is that what we should be doing? I guess those are all separate questions.
You're on page 27.
I'm on page 27.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you should have your minutes in the paper every 30
That's
days.
the way I read it, yes.
Small towns.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Right,
So
and so
maybe
why should we put it in our policy if that's not what we do?
Good point.
And I just want to make sure that when you check that out, there's no legal requirement that we do it either, and that's why it's in there. So,
I'll check that out.
and then also my next question on the data request form is that when I look at the form part of it on page 37, right at the top there's a note that says inspection is free, but there's a charge for copies. But when I go and I read through the policy, it's all jumbled in there, like we charge for this, we're gonna pay, you gotta pay for this and that kind of stuff. And that statement isn't clear within the policy. I was wondering if that statement could be incorporated into the policy itself.
The statement you're referring to is that
Is
the
the method
inspection is free, but there is a charge for copies?
Yes.
You're wanting that explicit
Or-
statement?
Well, just to reiterate that people know that they can come look at it for free. Yeah.
I can evaluate that.
Thank you.
I haven't looked at this in depth, but it looks pretty good. My only observation is that I think this might be the only policy where we're using, is it second person language when we're talking? I should have an English teacher here. You, talking to the public. I don't think any of our other policies are interactive like this, which the public is you in this. And that's how the Department of Administration puts them out. But it's an observation.
That's a good observation. I did not go word for word. I tried to put things into a format that worked for us. I'll see if there's a way I can clean that up so we have better consistency.
I noticed that it is a bylaw, and I think we said we were going to put that in the title, and it's not on the title for 204.
Oh, 204, not the data practice.
Right, the school board meeting minutes, because that's within the bylaw section, right? Mm-hmm. So it should be in the title. And as I reviewed this, again, I noticed that most of the deleted policies are covered or covered by statute, except for there were in policy 8095 procedures for meetings. There are a few things that, to me, they're not standing out as completely necessary, but I wanted you to be aware that there are pieces that are missing. Page 31. So this in 8095 it says that in the absence of the chair, that the vice chair would conduct the meeting. I think that's kind of our usual practice anyway. I didn't know if it needed to be in your bylaw. Piece about not recording in closed sessions, and then that the chairperson, the last paragraph, So those are three pieces that were in our old one that aren't in the new. Otherwise, I think everything else is either included in 204 or included in statute. So just wanted you to be aware.
Yeah, this is more a process question with data privacy. When the School Board Association does present their version, would we go through it then a process of?
We should certainly review it. In terms of looking at the format that the Department of Administration issues and checking around and looking at some other school districts do track with the Department of Administration policy format. There are variations between school districts, but it is a layout, it is a structure that has been used by other school districts. But when MSBA comes out with their update, I think we have to look at it and see how significant the differences might be. And so we had hoped not to have a policy come to our board and approved and then find that a new policy lands on our laps a couple months down the road. But we just felt like we couldn't wait any longer. So yes, we will be looking at that policy when it is issued, and we will come back to you if there are differences that are of sufficient importance to justify a modification in whatever it would be that the board would ultimately adopt pursuant to this recommendation.
Okay, that's good. I would like us to do that.
All righty.
So my question pertains to page 36 under request for summary data. And I'm supportive and glad that there's a timeline in there. I think that as I've attended other board meetings and read some things that at times people who request data information, they seem to be disappointed that it doesn't come in a timely fashion. And I'm glad that, I'm sure past policies have had a timeline as well, and I'd be interested to see what the Minnesota School Boards Association timeline. I think that's the bigger conundrum when we come to data requests is what's a timeline. So you give 10 days where you absolutely have to respond back and at least give them a timeline. And I think that's lenient on our part and gives us time because it's a significant request at times. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it takes hours and hours or weeks and months and lots of time. So who is the buck stops here with getting back to the people who request the data and giving them the specific date?
That would be my responsibility.
Okay. And is there a way that can be a strong, organized filing where it's stamped with the date received and copies of emails or whatever is given to you so that our district is fair in its desire to answer the data request, but also within our guidelines and within our parameters? I think our general public needs to understand that some requests are easy and some take time intensive, of which we have cut. We have cut our staff here at the board building. We've cut. So I'm surprised there isn't a charge for labor. Or is there? Have I missed? I saw that there was pages in there, but is there a general guidelines for when the request requires time that is intensive, that there's a guideline for that?
I think
there is. It's on page 37. There's a paragraph. Mm-hmm.
One of the things we cannot charge for is redaction, and very often that's a very time-consuming process that, depending on what the topic is, our attorneys do redaction, or for other ones we have staff doing redaction, but it is very time-intensive. I can think of at least one data request that we are currently working on that is tens of thousands of pages that have to be redacted. Yep, right.
No, I just wanted to point to a page, the top of the paragraph that touches on it.
Going back to something that you mentioned earlier, Doug, about, or maybe I think it was you, Superintendent Grunsath, about practice of the vice chair running the meeting if the chair isn't there. I think we need to codify it because it just cleans things up in the instance where somebody doesn't understand why we do things a certain way and might take it personally or not understand. So I would just suggest that we carry that through.
Okay.
Any other questions on those or comments? Okay, so moving to contracts, change orders, and leases.
In the contract section, we have a recommendation for approval of a contract with Campus Suite for a web development project. We have obviously a school district website. We have school building websites for our community. The existing websites that we have are built on a Google platform, which is going away. It is going away. Now, Google is...
Not Google. I know, but still. So even Google Classroom is going away? Okay.
Just the platform.
Just the web platform on which our websites are built. And so as Google is doing that, we felt it was an appropriate time for us to reevaluate our web pages. And while we're doing that, we also need to be aware that there are new standards and expectations in terms of ADA accessibility with respect to web pages. And those are standards and expectations that we very much want to meet. It's very critical that we have an effective web page. There were earlier comments in terms of marketing. There are all kinds of marketing in our day and age. One of the critical pieces of marketing is what your web presence looks like. And so we need a website that is as effective as it can be and satisfies all of the ADA requirements for doing that. We've gone through a process of identifying website vendors that do this kind of work based on what we were seeing and based on what we've seen other school districts make use of. We invited various vendors to submit bids to us and proposals. We've reviewed those and believe that Campus Suite represents the best option for us. This would be a 3-year agreement that would result in not only upgrading our web page and satisfying all the ADA requirements that exist, but also providing us really strong support systems to allow us to make changes to our web page over time. And we also anticipate that the ADA standards and expectations that exist today are probably going to evolve over time. And so we would continue to benefit from the services that Campus Suite would provide us to make sure that our website would continue to evolve as standards and expectations in terms of ADA requirements change over time. Be happy to respond to any questions you might have.
So what were the determining factors for selecting Campus Suite? Because, cost, obviously, it's really cost competitive, but was it based on what other school districts?
So I know they looked at support. So the Campus Suite has available support training for all the users who will be part of it. That was a big factor. The ADA compliance, they have a checker that they actually run through our website, and they will let us know if any pages are not compliant. So that was another huge benefit of that product.
The last time we developed our website, we did so with a company that helped us to develop it, but didn't have any ongoing services for that website. So once it was developed, we were kind of on our own. This is a different model where they help us to develop it, but then they continue to help us change and transform it as needed.
And is there a component of that plan that includes feedback from users? Because I know it hasn't necessarily always been the most user-friendly page, and we all experience web pages differently. So is there a component of their pre-planning process that might solicit feedback from folks?
I know Katie actually sent a survey out to the schools
Families.
and the families, and looking for input what they didn't like about our current one, and they're bringing that to the design team.
I'm wondering if our logo and color scheme is a part of this, or if that just sort of slides in and they're going to use what we've already got.
It certainly can be a part of that conversation. I would hope that they would happen at the same time. I think because this contract is coming to us a little later than we had planned, I think we have a little more time because this project likely won't start until next fall now. And so we can be working with design professionals to reboot our branding scheme.
But that's not a component of the RFP that they responded to, so that would come at a separate cost.
Anything that they would use to brand, color-wise, font, all of that, all comes from more the marketing side. So the branding that we currently use was developed 5 years ago. When we did that, we did not invest a lot in it. It was meant to be kind of a transition to a new branding, and it kind of stuck as the new branding rather than a transition. So we're still hoping to transition.
Can you share what other school districts in Minnesota or in the area use Campus Suite?
I can get that information. I know Katie actually did a survey of school districts similar in our size, and she had that spreadsheet or that sheet she shared out.
Okay, great. And thanks for your work on this part.
On that point, I would share that Campus Suite does a lot of work with K through 12 institutions, so we can certainly get you more specific information, but we have a high level of comfort that they know schools, they do work for schools, they know what we're about.
Yeah, I noted in your report that you gave to us that they did work with K through 12. I'm curious to Google some other school districts.
One of the things Katie had people do, both staff and parents and administrators, she gave us a whole list of links to websites and had us review them using different things in mind, the pictures, the design, the ease of use, without knowing who had developed any of the sites, and they were from the vendors that had been involved. So then she used that to help decide which vendor to go with as well, as far as what people's preferences were.
So when we're looking at new web design, does this then trigger into every school? All of our sites will be a new design. Will that entail teachers that have web pages already needing to do new web pages? All of our organizations, I just developed a speech website, speech and debate one, so that's going to turn over as well?
Yes, all those sites will eventually turn over. Right now, they can actually link the teacher pages in here and still use the Google site, but they'll be moving them over so they're ADA compliant. That's one of the big goals, is that even the teacher pages need to be ADA compliant.
Well, I'd imagine this is going to be a huge undertaking. I think about the small ones that I've been a part of redoing, so thank you in advance. And the only thing I would caution is financial scope creep, because these can bleed very quickly. Right. Maybe we can get some students to work with us on that.
That is our only contract on the agenda. We do have a placeholder anticipating a change order from Krause Anderson for the work at Rock Ridge, but at this point in time, we are still awaiting that final change order.
Correct.
But we're still hoping it's going to be under the total cap, right?
Correct.
I spent some time and drafted an email to the board thinking it would be late last month, and I wanted you to have that information, and here it didn't even make it last month. And now it's Monday and I don't have it in my hand either, and I just sent an email to our architect, and it's being reviewed to be certified, and I expect to have it within 2 days, so I'll have that for the board meeting next week. But Jackie will get it out electronically as soon as it arrives.
And moving forward, in terms of resolutions, we have our standard resolutions as to the acceptance of donations. And we also have a resolution proposed for adoption of the preliminary budget report for fiscal year 2019 budget. We had a recent committee of the whole meeting last week. There was information presented at that meeting and ample discussion. And as all the board members are aware, there have been supplemental information items that have been distributed and made available to board members in recent days. And I think this would be an appropriate time for us to walk through those.
Done? I know that there's been a lot of information that we sent out ahead of time. I know there's a couple of, I want some paper copies. I did make some paper copies and bring them with this evening. I'm not sure who wants them, or do you want me to send them around? The first is a document that was shared during the Committee of the Whole budget meeting, and that is the general fund unrestricted budget sheet that's coming around. It's also on board book. It was on board book for the Committee of the Whole meeting. This represents, like I said, the unrestricted general fund budget. So on the left is the FY18 budget, and on the right is what we're calling the working budget. This reflects the adjustments that we've been working on. This does not include restricted general fund. And so you're going to see a difference between unrestricted and restricted. And so what I'm trying to say is that Comp Ed isn't a part of this page because that is restricted general fund. So those adjustments you wouldn't see on there. I also sent out the start of a breakdown of adjustments, and I think there's a few extras up there. I know there's not enough for probably everyone in the room, but for people who want to see that, I think they'll end up over by Member Gorham.
Superintendent, is this the one that you sent out this afternoon?
Nope, this is
okay.
On the top. This says option A,
Okay.
and here comes option B.
So this was Saturday.
All right. So in the process, as I mentioned at the committee of the whole meeting where we're discussing the budget, we have met with our labor management group. We've met with the quality leadership teams from elementary, from middle, from high school. We've met with our principals a couple of times. We have another meeting coming up a little later this week to go over this again with principals and gather feedback. They received these documents when you did, to be able to review them and provide feedback as well. Since they went out, I've had a few conversations, answered a few questions. We'll continue to be gathering feedback both from principals and from staff and from cabinet and in general, so that as we move along, we'll have more and more feedback to share with you, and I will kind of continue to send that out as I get more feedback too. It also provides you with some opportunities between now and the school board meeting to be talking with folks too. But I just want to kind of walk you through this. I'm looking at the one that says option A on the top. So we know that coming into FY19, we have a base deficit of $3,137,192, thereabouts. That, again, could change if our revenues come up higher than we're currently projecting, or if our expenditures are below that. That base deficit number could change. When I say could change, if you think about the variance of our overall budget, considering that our budget, at everything included, is around that 100 million mark, a 1% variance would be about $1 million. So we could be within 1% of our projection, and it would still be $1 million. Please know that we are projecting on the conservative side of both our revenues and our expenditures. So we are hopeful that our deficit is less than this amount, but we won't really know that until the end of the year when we have our final numbers. So, and then new investments of $2,976,800. Part of that is some staff support. The other piece is specific school supports. Please know that this new investment number, this in option A, represents the money that would then become discretionary at sites. But that money would also be spent on staff in some form, whether it's interventionists or social workers or counselors or more staff to provide more individualized education. That pretty much that whole amount is going to be in staff in one way or another, depending on the needs of the site. The adjustments that we have identified below, we have identified by department, and I'm not going to read the whole sheet to you, but you can see that we have identified, and I didn't put a total of what's identified. I did put remaining to be identified 202,000, so just under $6 million is represented on here. On the back of this page, you see the LTFM shift is $1 million, and that represents long-term facilities maintenance funds that would be shifted to pay for some of our maintenance staff as they're doing maintenance work. We would intend that this not be a long-term solution, but this be a short-term solution over the next couple of years while we further stabilize the district's finances. And then this version does include a shift of ratio by 3, which is $2.4 million. As I said, this number that we need to identify will continue to shift and change. And my intent would be that the ratio would be the area that we would be reducing. Option B is the only part that's really different is the top. The amount that goes to discretionary is reduced. And what that does is, when we spoke at the Committee of the Whole, we talked about 80% and 20%, that 20% was going to be district-wide, and that our goal was to have 80% be support above the ratio, or discretionary funds as they've been called before. This model takes 20% of that and allocates it to staffing at that school, which means they have 60% left in discretionary. So our initial model that we talked about when the resolution was passed was 40, 40, and 20. This is a 60, 20, and 20. So it's still a little farther down the road than we thought we would be. Our goal was to have the whole 80% be discretionary. The difference on this one is that the ratio shift is reduced to 1.5 for a total of $1,400,000. So the difference between the two is 1.1 million in that shift. So the 20% allocated and 60% discretionary versus 80% discretionary. Questions, because I know there's probably a million.
Go ahead, Alana. I'll follow you.
My first question is the specific school supports investment. Do we know what positions those are funding yet, or are those in flux until the fall comes?
Well, our hope and our plan is that the continuous improvement teams at the schools would be using their needs assessments to identify what those needs are. So whether it's math interventionists or reading interventionists or after school or mental health care, those I think are going to be the determinants of what those investments would be.
And so are they going to be distributed first come, first serve, need-based, who has the best plea? How does that work? Sorry.
I forgot to talk about the last page on each of these.
Sure.
The comp ed comparison pages are the last page. So on option A, you can see the difference between last year and this year. So there's a number for support above ratio, and then the 20% district-wide for staffing listed on option A. And then on option B, there's a list for discretionary, allocated, and the 20% district-wide staffing. So on A, the support above ratio is the amount that the CIT would be working with at each of those sites. And on option B, the discretionary list is the number that those sites would be working with.
And so do all of our schools have a developed and strong CIT system in place already? I mean, I know
Yes.
Stowe is in the middle of their comprehensive assessment or needs assessment. So does that play into what the CIT is going to need to know before they can decide?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a couple larger questions, I guess, not specific, just to the comp ed piece. What did I do with my notes? As we look at the anticipated base deficit and where we're looking at projections for next year, how close does that potentially bring us to the statutory operating debt threshold? Or are we're good?
We're good.
Okay.
Granted, I should say, we're good as long as we make these adjustments.
That was my other question. Well, actually, no, this is slightly tangential, but I remember, I think it was in January when we were looking at finances, we looked at that buffer fund. I can't think of a better name to call it, but it's essentially kind of a pool of funds that you budget in as a line item, but then you leave available for if there's overflow or contingency. Thank you. And last year, I think that was too skinny of a fund. And so as you look at the budget for 2019, recognizing that you're estimating conservatively, and both in terms of money coming in and money going out, what is that contingency fund? How does that fit?
We're not all the way through in terms of the final line item totals for our final budget. A lot of that is dependent on what happens as we lead up to that. Historically, that contingency has dwindled to a smaller and smaller amount. I believe in the last year or so, it's been in the range of $200,000 to $300,000.
I think it's more in the 600 to 700.
2 years ago it was. This year it's like 3.
Okay.
And it's dwindled because our overall budget has necessitated that. So we've got a little bit of a buffer there. It's not very much. Certainly, as our process moves forward, as we have more current and more confidence in where we think we're going to end up with this year, if there's some additional revenue that we are anticipating, that'd be an area that we would like to address. But as Mr. Gronseth has also said, as there is the potential for some of these numbers to improve, we also want to look at what is being recommended to you here today and understand that there are decisions on this document that would have great impact. And so if we are in a position to reevaluate some of those, if better revenues become available, that also might be a priority that we would probably want to look at.
And I just like to make clear that this budget still does, B, we know A didn't, but we know B does not make any investment in our reserves. That our $111,000 that we have, we're still going to have just 100. We're not planning to add to that with this budget.
At this stage, a reserve is not contemplated in these numbers. Again, we've got some numbers that may evolve over time. If we think there are resources that would allow us to address priorities that are in the recommendation to you today, if there are opportunities for us to address contingency, if there's opportunities for us to address reserve, those would all be good things to have happen. At this point in time, we don't think these numbers support us carving out additional resources for reserve.
Doesn't this bring the negative number to 0, though? So it does increase the reserve?
Our objective is to get to a balanced overall budget, which would include bringing us up from the current negative.
Right.
So as we move forward, I would really like to see a plan on how we're going to address this moving forward, even if it has to be multiple years, because I think we have to be really intentional and make a decision that that's important. Yet I understand the needs for contingencies. I understand needs for adding more staff and hotspots and all that kind of stuff. It's all important, but we need to recognize that, focusing on a reserve to give ourselves a buffer to be able to address those things is just as important. So I would hope sometime in the future we could see something.
I wanted to follow up on our little side conversation there. The general fund is where that 100,000 came from a positive. But that's because some of those areas are well above positive and some of them are negative. This includes bringing the negative areas up to zero, so we would see an increase in the overall reserve. So there is some plan in there to make progress on that, just to clarify.
I'm just going to echo Member Oswald's statement that it's good to see a little increase, but I think having a plan, I remember discussing this months ago, that, or maybe it was last year, having a long-term plan for that, I think would be useful. Perhaps not something that we're dealing with right now, but maybe in July, when we've had a few weeks away from budgeting, to come back on that. My question is sort of a clarification. So the ratio, when we're talking ratio here, where are we measuring the ratio? Is this overall district staff to number of students enrolled? Is it that basic, that when we're talking ratio adjustments?
Okay. I will say that it's different at each level. First off, there's multiple ratios. There's K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12 are a different number for each of those levels. At the elementary level, the allocation is truly the number of classrooms there are at that site. The specialists, so art, music, phy-ed, and media, are in addition to that ratio. So they're not, so at the elementary level, the ratio is a truer reflection of class size, although it doesn't spread evenly. Some grade levels, depending on how many kids are in that level, are going to be, there's going to be some above that ratio and some below that ratio.
Can I clarify on that then? So if we added a math interventionist, that would not change the ratio, but it'd be another adult providing education to kids in an elementary school building, but it wouldn't actually affect the ratio. Am I understanding it correctly?
If they did so with discretionary funds.
Yes.
Which could be comp ed, title, achievement and integration, any other fund. So, yeah. We have had in the past, the reason I pause, Piedmont is a great example. They know that they wanted to have an interventionist in place, and so working together, their site improvement team, or continuous improvement team, sorry, I get my acronyms mixed up sometimes, said, you know what, we would rather have a little bit higher class size at this grade and have an interventionist. So they actually used a teacher from their ratio to do that. But generally speaking, if they're hiring support staff, be it interventionists, be it social worker, however they want to add to that with the discretionary funds, it's not part of the ratio.
Okay. So for the purpose of this definition of ratio and the ratio shift we're talking about, at least at the elementary level, we're really just talking about the primary classroom teacher.
Right.
Okay.
At the it changes a little bit at the middle and high school because there are more people in that ratio. So we provide some base staff. So we say, we fund the ratio at however many teachers to however many students, and then we add 2 counselors, we add a media, but if the staff wants to add another counselor, sometimes they do that from their allocation, and sometimes they do that with discretionary funds. So any staff that's paid for with discretionary funds is not a consideration of that ratio. and some base support staff is also outside that ratio.
And is this the same ratio that if I looked it up on the Minnesota Department of Education website and they said the ISD 709 student-to-teacher ratio is X, would that be the same ratio we're talking about here, or do they have a different definition of ratio?
You know, it depends which report they're pulling it from. Most of the state level sites take just the pure number of staff compared to the number of kids. So our staffing allocation number, that ratio that we use, is probably going to look different than you would see on state websites.
So to clarify, if we were using an MDE style definition of ratio where we're looking at number of staff to number of students, there's not really any difference between options A and B here, because presuming that the discretionary funds go into staff, we're still going to have the same number of staff in the building. It's just whether or not we are assigning those staff as primary classroom, or if we're giving the sites the freedom to assign those dollars. Maybe let me simplify that.
Yes.
There's probably no difference in the number of staff in schools between option A and option B.
Right. It's
Okay.
the same amount of money.
Yeah, and this, yeah.
Assuming that the majority of site investments are going to be in staff of some capacity, it would fund about the same. Took me a minute to.
Rosie, I think you're next.
I have some questions about this, but is there a way we can better understand what current staff at our current sites are being funded by discretionary dollars right this year? Just to, I guess I'd like that information. And then in terms of the budget adjustment section, I was just wondering if you could kind of flesh out a little bit more the list of things you have under curriculum and instruction, and also district-wide, the listing you have there, and then also facilities and maintenance. Just to give us more of the thinking behind those three areas.
Which were the three? Sorry.
The curriculum and instruction,
Okay.
district-wide, and then facilities and maintenance.
Okay. The first part on the current staff that's being funded with discretionary, I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure we went over that in our meeting with the site budgets, where each of the principals plan for how they're going to use their discretionary. The positions that they were going to fund was listed in that, but we can look back and reshare that with you. The curriculum and instruction, PD, stands for professional development. This isn't a full exclusion of professional development, but reducing the expenses that we incur with some of them, kind of trying to save money where we can. Mastery Connect is some software that we had just been implementing over the last couple of years, and we're more on level with that, and so we can make some reductions as far as the training and support that goes along with that. The mentoring budget, this is not the full mentoring budget. Currently the whole budget is about $60,000. This is a smaller portion of that, probably reducing by a meeting or two over the course of the year for each of the teams. The secondary content meeting reduction, it's looking at having fewer of those meetings, but we're also moving more towards our continuous improvement teams, working more closely with our staff. So it's kind of a change in model of how we are, how we're doing some of that work. The media budget reduction, 2 years ago, we made a considerable investment in our media budgets, an increase in the media budgets, and this number reduces that by about half. And that is the same reduction that we made this year when we made those mid-year reductions. It kind of holds them at that level. And then the district level supported AmeriCorps positions. This is something that we've talked about for a couple of years now. Last year, we intended to move away from the AmeriCorps model. And after some discussions with the Y, we agreed to another year of transition. They gave us that year at a reduced rate. There's a few different reasons for this. One, when we began this work with AmeriCorps, gosh, I'm not sure how many years ago, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when we were looking at 21st Century Grant and the model that we wanted to use for using AmeriCorps for interventions, our hope was that we were going to be able to use AmeriCorps staff to work with our higher level students so that our staff could focus on students with higher needs. And the way the grant worked, they needed to work with their lower level students, which means staff was working with higher level students. And we really want our most educated, most highly trained staff working with our students with the highest levels of need. So there's a philosophical difference between their program and how we would like to use staff. I have had some initial conversations with new leadership at the Y and perhaps changing that model and our ability to make some changes to grant language to be able to use those staff differently. I will say if that was the case, if we were able to use them differently, our recommendation would probably be different in this area as well. I also want to say that when we started this program, we paid a third, the Northland Foundation paid a third, and the city paid a third. Since that time, Northland Foundation, which I completely understand, they're not meant to be a sustaining funding source. And so they've moved away from supporting this model. The city was funding it through the Parks and Recs, the added funding that was put in place, I'm forgetting what year that went into place, but because the staff was doing after-school programming, that was a connection there. They'd like to move away from that model as well. So as our community help with funding that has moved away as well, our portion has increased. And so between the two, we had planned on moving away from that model this year. We would still have reading core, we would still have math core, and some of our schools do budget for their own AmeriCorps programs, and those could continue as well. That is how some sites choose to use their discretionary funds, which we would still support them doing that. At the district level, the reduction in site professional development funds in last year's budget, one of our investments was to take money from the district professional development account and push that out to the sites so that they could start doing site-specific training that they felt aligned with their goals as staff. This reduction would be half of that amount, and so rather than, help me out, Peggy, rather than 60,000, it's 30,000. Okay. Lease revenues increased as we went from the former Cobb site to the Rockridge site. We're no longer leasing, but we are collecting lease revenues instead. The middle school referendum funding decrease. It's not really a referendum. It's just what this funding stream has been called for many, many years. I'm not sure at what point there was a referendum that was passed, probably 20-some years ago, but the funding continued, and it was additional funding that went to middle schools to support the middle school model. This would not be that entire amount. This is a portion of that amount that would be reduced. And then clerical adjustment of weeks. Here at Hawks, as you know, for the past 5 or 6 years, we have been reducing staff here, reducing the amount of time staff works here, and so we would like to sit down all together and really look at what projects do we have excuse me, in the summer, how many staff are here in the summer, and look at the clerical levels over the course of the summer in this building, but also in site buildings, in school buildings as well. So that is something that we want to look at. And then facilities and maintenance, the elimination of open positions. We discussed those in December as well. There are also positions that we're having trouble filling. The electrician, the plumber, and...
Those are the only two.
Okay. And then changing the cleaning schedule is something that we're also looking at. I believe it's different for... Dave is here.
Right.
And so we're still having discussions about exactly what that looks like at each of the levels. One of the possibilities would be from going to every 2 days to every 3 days, or different models of what that looks like. I think that's everything that you asked about.
So my questions are just a little bit overarching. Like, I thank you for this detail of what's on this. I think I had a fair handle of it just because of my working in the buildings. So I know what going from 2 days to 3 days looks like. It's not going to be happy. I know how much staff you've cut over a long period of time to keep as much of our money in the classroom and in our teachers that deal directly. So I appreciate the work of all of us, of all of you, to put this all on paper. But so I ask, like, and this will be our journey, I hope, in the next months as we solidify this budget. But when I come to meetings like this, I really am interested in talking about what does this budget show us in equity? Where could you tell me that because we're spending money here, it's to keep that vision of our district? And I know you say that, Bill, I do. These are not questions that I'm asking because I think we're not. It's just questions as a board that I would like to see, and I think it would just be so positive in the way that our community that comes to these meetings would see. So where in our book is our equity? And when I look at that too, I want to know what our money is in the full service community schools. Where in our budget are we maintaining that? And we can look at that and say, you know, this is the money that has that element in it, because I don't know that. I also want to know where our pathways to teaching is. I want to know where our transportation equity stuff is. Is it there? Is it cut? Are we working towards it? Those would be the conversations I'd love to have with us. So that's kind of an overall. I think it would be really fascinating for all of us to have just a special meeting on class size. have an honest conversation about what do we know about class size. I know about class size and its impact, and there's differing, it's kind of debatable. Some will say, but I like our ratio for our pre-K through our second grade and our third grade through our fifth grade. All of those ratios look really good. I just think that would be interesting. I worry about cutting in technology because I worry about our competitive edge, although our online would be a great place. I worry about the parent group that comes to us with information about how they want us to work towards, I know you've got telepresence was a mid-year break, mid-year cut, and it's still a cut on our district. I don't know how much, I can't remember what you said telepresence would cost, $200,000. So then I wonder, are there grants that we can pursue for that? Are there other revenues that we could go so that we could not list it as a cut, but know that it's still a vision of some or not on this board? So those are my general observations about our budget and how we talk about it. I'd also encourage our board, I don't know if I would love to have us be more proactive in our media and on our relationship with them, and I loved that Mr. Gronseth got a chance to do an op-ed after our last budget meeting of the whole, and I appreciate the support that we got from the DNT just to put it out there. And I just think that sometimes as a board, I would love to have op-eds written by us as a board or written by some of us with some of our names and get out in front of any potential columns that they're going to write. I think right now would be an incredible opportunity for us to write an op-ed, someone, our leadership, or a few of us on the board. If it's a united topic that we all are united on, like we're in the budget process right now, and here's where our board's vision and conversation, and here's what we're looking for with our community, and isn't this an exciting time? Or if it's on how we understand class size and how the board is going to look at that. But I really would like to encourage our board to do more active work there. That's not really a budget question, but I just threw it in there.
Member Lofeld's going to teach a class. I understand that this option B just came through today, and I appreciate you I think this kind of helps to contextualize things to a certain extent. I would be really curious to hear from William Howes and from the principals and teachers at the schools who would see more compensatory education dollars to see if this is truly in the spirit of what we voted on a couple of months ago. And I don't know if we want to be cautious about, we voted on 80-20 and we're doing 80-20, but it's a little co-opted. And so I would be really curious to get feedback from the community on what their perspective is on, because I worry that it would become a slippery slope and that we would then end up in a place where a few years down the road we're continuing to increase that percentage, or 20% for staffing, then there becomes a 15% for something else that's not necessarily in the spirit of the vote that we unanimously supported a couple of months ago. And so I think before I would be comfortable having and maybe there's good conversation that can happen around the table here tonight, but I would really like us to see some feedback from experts around that, because while that money may have gone to staffing anyways, is us doing that on this end of things truly in the spirit of what we voted for? So I would, I guess I don't know who those next steps necessarily come from. I know that there's community groups who I'm confident will weigh in on that. Some of them are here tonight. But I think it would be helpful to hear from other folks too on their perspectives with that, because I just worry about scope creep on that one.
Yeah, and like I said, I sent this information out to them at the same time, principals and cabinet, and so as I get feedback from them and have more discussions with them, I'll be sure to share that. I did want to, if you look at the spreadsheets, the comp ed comparison spreadsheets, so FY 18 is listed there, and you can see that the discretionary total for FY18 was $1,024,247. And then if you compare that to on option A, it says support above the ratio. On option B, it says discretionary. So the amount of discretionary available to buildings on option B would go from that $1,024,000 to $3,335,000. So it is an increase of over $2 million that would be available as discretionary. On the option A, it goes up to 4.4 million, so it is an increase of about 3 million in discretionary.
Thank you for pointing that out. And that's great to hear. I just, I'm cautious about setting precedent 2 months after voting for something that our community has overwhelmingly asked for.
I just have a couple comments, and I guess I can add to that conversation. First of all, Member Lofald, feel free to ask Chuck Frederick for an op-ed anytime you feel passionate about anything, because that's really how it works. Well, as far as a United thing, we would have to pass it at the board level first, and then the DNT would know about it. So that's
less than 4 of you.
Absolutely. So feel free to be as passionate as you like and get as much press as you want. Sometimes that can work in your favor and sometimes not. I just wanted to be clear that the wage increase that I'm working on with Mr. Swirsky and I'm blanking her name, I'm sorry.
Linda,
yes, Linda Kinnear, is still a possibility under this budget because it's not specifically named as an investment or anything like that. So my understanding is that it'll work out to be relatively cost neutral, the way we do it. But I want to make sure that that's addressed so that we don't get to finally bring it up after we worked so long and hard on it and go, well, it wasn't in the budget. That's not acceptable at this point. So please figure out how we can address that to make sure that's included. And then I was going to ask, I have so many notes here. My question is, if we're not funding the middle school model like it should have been in whatever referendum funding model is, what is the advantage to having a middle school model? Or how are they going to make up that difference? Is that difference needed to be made up, I guess?
Well, I can share that anytime funding is decreased, it's something that we worry about. This isn't the whole amount. This is a portion of that amount. It's about the portion that we decreased in December, and so we're hopeful they'll still have funding for them to use to support this model. And it is it's another discretionary source used for middle school. I know that the majority of it has gone to staffing in the past, and that is how they used it this year, to about the level that we've reduced it here.
So is the junior high model cheaper than a middle school model?
That's a good question. I think I'd have to have a middle school principals get together and talk about that. Really the middle school model is about having a broad experience for students. It's about having time for staff to come together. Our PLCs help with that as well. As we restructured the day, some of that is more built in than it used to be. But I would want middle school staff to come together and have a conversation to compare to a junior high model.
Sure. And I guess my last comment is that I know I have made it abundantly clear to administration that I will not vote in favor of any budget that raises our ratio by 3.0. It's not acceptable to me. It's a bad public relations move. Parents will interpret it the way they are, knowing that we haven't raised ratios over the years, but we've raised it by nothing. And to hear 3.0 that can be blown up way beyond proportion. And so I'm very adamant, and I will stick to that, because it's just not a good move overall, especially for those schools that aren't getting the comp ed funding. And if we're able to reduce that in any way, shape, or form, I am all for that, because, I see the effects across our district of, schools that don't get funding, and it's tough. I get it. It's really hard. I mean, when you're talking like, fifth grade classes of 37 kids, I wouldn't want my kids in that kind of class. So if we can lower that and know that affects the amount of FTE they still get, if we can reduce it in any way, shape, or form, that's what I'm for. So that's where I stand on that.
Certainly, class sizes in some districts are used as a marketing tool. So just kind of throw that out there. But a couple things around the middle school. I was actually on the committee, a large committee that met here many, many times to move towards a middle school model. And a lot of time and energy was put into that model. And so I certainly have seen the benefits of the model with my own kids who have gone through middle school. I would want to have lots of discussions with our middle school staff and principals about any further reductions and the proposed reductions and what that really will mean to them. And then the second piece, I guess I wanted you to expand on, you kind of talked a little bit about it, Bill, was just please go over the process of who you're seeking feedback on, kind of timelines for getting information back, and how we are going to hear the feedback from, say, our principals and other leadership teams that on these proposals. How will we get that information?
Excuse me. I do have, like I said, I did send it out electronically, and I do get kind of informal emails and questions and phone calls, kind of like I do from the board too. But we are having a meeting with principals later this week. I have met with union leadership and talked through what the budget process would look like. I've met with cabinet members, and we'll continue to meet with all of those groups as well to gather feedback. I'd like to say that the proposal that's in front of you is a culmination of advice that we've received from our QSC process, our QLTs, all of those meetings that we've had. We've gathered input on what these reductions could look like. Also received advice, suggestions from department heads, and so the first wave of that information is the reductions and the investments that are in front of you. It is a product of all of the input that we've gathered from those groups. Now that it's all together and it's in this form, I've sent it back out to them, like I said, and in the same kind of conversations that we're having here, there might become suggestions for adjustments, for tweaks to this, and so those would come to you in changes that we are proposing in this between now and the end of June. And there's a lot of work that happens between the preliminary budget and the final budget, because we are, in some ways building the bus while it's driving down the road. And so there's room to make shifts in this as we gain feedback from you and from all the other groups. I didn't really plan on summarizing each individual's input and sending it to you. And so it's more of a product that's developed by everyone.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, feedback?
I do.
Good.
I just want to make sure I understand. On option B, we'll just take what's at the top of the form there, Congdon Park. They were allocated $460,000 this year, and the budget says they'll be allocated $153. So is that $300 and some thousand dollars they have to make up somehow in their budget? I don't understand what that means.
That difference would mainly be in the ratio shift. They would have fewer teachers at the site.
With regard to the ratio shift, is that a uniform number across the district, or is this just the big picture?
It's uniform by grade level, and so it becomes our building block for each site budget. So each building receives an allocation in FTEs. So that APU report that we're looking at earlier that says you have this many kindergarten, this many first grade, second grade, you take that number and multiply by the ratio for that grade level, and it tells you how many, divide, not multiply. That would be a lot of teachers. Divide by the ratio number, and you might come up with something like 3.18, and then the next grade level might be 3.74, and so you add all those up and it gives you the total number of teachers per site. And then that then goes out to the building for them to build a master schedule or class lists at the elementary. And they may come back and say, mathematically it works perfectly to have that many, but the way this lays out, we just can't do it. And that's when we have to step in and say, yep, we're going to have to put an extra FTE at this site because the numbers just don't work out that way. We do generally budget for 5 to 6 extra FTEs in a year because mathematically it doesn't always work out the way it does ratio-wise. So building starts with that allocation of FTE, and then there are additional funding sources, comp ed, title, achievement and integration for some buildings, and other sources as well that kind of build in all of those pieces. And so it's layers of funding for some sites. Some of our buildings don't have any of those other building blocks. I know Congdon is an example of somewhere that does not receive title or comp ed or achievement and integration. So what you see here is what they would get. They're not the only school like that. Homecroft, Lakewood, Leicester, Ordine East and East don't have other additional funding sources.
And then I'm going to go back to that kind of line of questioning, and I know it's painful because we all come with different backgrounds and different experiences. So Chair Kirby just kind of asked a question that gave us some information about the fact that Congdon, because they're going to be decreased in this comp ed dollars, are not going to, that money is being used for FTE. But my question would be, if Congdon has, how many students? Where is that kind of information? They have 600. Yeah, that's not on Earth. So I would think that Congdon, just by nature of their enrollment, gets FTEs that are within a ratio that we say, that because they are the largest of our our elementaries, their FTEs must, I mean, I know from my background with being in education that so when we're looking at the fact that the comp ed monies are going to be less than, which then might triple into some teachers, we cannot dramatize this because they're getting FTE allotments according to their population. That's how it works. And so keep that in mind as we look and hear public outcry or disagreement, because the FTEs are certainly, they're there to help Congdon's population that are not performing at grade level, which I think 153,000 have used, targeted for that need. But it's, and when we look at that, it's going to increase. And you can go right down the line with all of the schools. A lot of our eastern end schools have population that their FTEs are allotted to them on that number by our administration team. So we have to ask them a little bit more pointed questions too about if Congdon's population or Lester Park's population is significant, it's big, it's up there in the 400s to 600s, then their FTE allotment to that building is within the ratio. So keep that in mind. The other question too is, I had it and then I lost it. So I can come back, maybe.
I can comment while you think. But I would just highly suggest that Superintendent Granza sent us links to some ratio adjustment worksheets, and I found those personally extremely valuable. He emailed them to us, the link. So I would encourage you to really look through that, because it details what their FTE would be with each kind of ratio scenario. It's not perfect.
Okay. Then my question came back to me too, is about when we're looking at our realignment and looking at the vision, our vision of equity, and just how all the layers that go into understanding how we're funding our buildings is, are we going to talk about enrollment, open enrollment? Are we going to talk about making sure that our schools are, within a population that is best practice for that neighborhood? And so as we look at aligning monies and numbers and FTEs, as a board, is there a place in our conversation for making sure we're not overburdening schools with numbers and where the open enrollment options are? I don't know much about this, as I'm treading into probably some really, but again, I don't know how we can come up with a budget when there's other layers, just like how many people we put in each building, and is there a way to equalize that and balance that?
Oh, I know. I got it. I was going to refer back to those enrollment examples. Please only look at them as examples. The numbers that were used for that were projections for this year. Those aren't the actual enrollment numbers, but they do serve as an example of what it could look like if those ratio shifts were in place. When I asked the principals to develop those, we didn't have the projection numbers yet, and so that is something that we would develop relatively quickly moving forward here. And we've reported those out in the past, in past years once they're developed too. So, but I did want you to have some kind of reference point to be able to look at. So that's what the intent of those were.
I'll turn mine off.
I'm wondering what research says about the impact of class sizes when we're talking 1.5 or 3 in terms of ratio.
I also want to be careful too when we're talking about ratio shifts. That's different than the number of kids in a class.
Yes.
So a ratio shift of 1 doesn't mean 1 more in class. It could if the numbers rolled that way, but it's more like 1 to 5 probably, depending on the level.
1 to 5 what?
Students.
a ratio shift of 1 has a class size impact of 1 to 5?
It could. It's like I said, at the elementary level, it's a closer reflection of that. When you get to the middle and high school level, that's when that shift starts looking a little bit different because there's more support staff.
So then, my question is,
Yep.
not ratio change, it's class size.
Yep.
What does the research say about the impact of a change in class size of a few students?
If we use John Hattie's research as a reference point, who has done some of the largest meta-analysis studies in history, class size has very low effect on achievement. And that's until you reach a class size of about, I think it's between 14 and 17, there's not really an effect on achievement. Now, I will say that most studies that were included don't test the ceiling of that. They test where it starts making a difference. So I think that more likely it's a range. So there's probably a range of, between 17 and some other number, it doesn't have as large of effect. But if you get below this number or above that number, what research doesn't tell us that I'm aware of at this point is what's that upper number?
I still would be interested in getting, and I said this kind of at the beginning, the current numbers. I appreciated that ratio, the pages that were given to us, but I think it's just really important that we all see the real numbers of kids in our schools, and then the class sizes currently around the district, and so I will appreciate that information that you've requested from the principals to help in my thinking around this and my conversations with the community.
I want to be clear that I haven't asked the principals for that yet because we don't have those projection enrollments nailed down. But as soon as we do, we'll get that out and ask them to start building. And it's going to look pretty much like the examples that I've given you. And the numbers that we have right now won't be 100% what we have in the fall either, because we know that there's movement in the summer, and we don't have a good handle on kindergarten numbers yet. That's still kind of our best guess, as it is every year at about this time.
So to kind of follow up with what Member Sandstead said, I know that we as a district used to and probably still do have recommended sizes for like how much we would really want for optimized learning in kindergarten or first grade. I remember for Title I schools, it's right around 20. And so I didn't recognize that as a ratio number actually. So, and I just know that, looking at your sheets at the early numbers and those kinds of things, that almost every school is above that, and some significantly so for their first and second graders. So that's where the impacts of a 1.5 versus a 3.0 bother me, because we know if we're all about early learning and pre-K and getting to them, the most optimal environment to learn is with smaller class sizes early on. As we get older, we can handle more in a classroom, but we're not meeting our ratio goal as it is right now. So I find that tough, knowing that there are some kindergarten classes that are going to be well over 30 projected. We're still going through kindergarten roundup, so yeah, hopefully we'll have more come and we'll be able to allocate more FTE and lower them, but that's the difficult part of this conversation for me, and that's why I'm not going to support a 3.0 raise in the ratio, because that number cannot go up.
Yeah, I agree with you, Member Oswald. There were a couple other things I wanted to comment on to what Member Member Lofold had said about open enrollment. Just kind of reminding folks that one of the reasons why we put the immersion programs out Lowell was with a hope to attract kids from across the district as well at those early ages. And so, I think the open enrollment, there's many levels to that conversation, but that was an attempt, and I certainly know we have a lot of Lester Park parents that are wanting to and are sending their kids to Lowell for the immersion program. So, that was some of the thinking a few years ago of the investments we made with that. And then the other, point I wanted to make that Superintendent Grunson mentioned is we'll be getting the kindergarten numbers those are pretty good numbers, but in some areas they will shift, and I just hope we can be really thoughtful with those numbers and staff those numbers before the week before school starts. And as some of us know, that did happen in some of our schools, that we were looking at huge kindergarten classes, and we can't have that. We just cannot have that.
So then my question would be to our leadership team is, do we need another go-round on this budget that reflects this board's commitment to a class size that is, won't exceed 26 in that K through 3 or a 4 to 5, that actually that's a resolution that this board brings forward and directs the administration to make a budget, and that will look a lot different. I know it will. Yeah, your eyes should open wide. In a way, I would, but I would enjoy that conversation. Let me see what we will lose when this board, just like you put into our vision, our priority of having comp ed realigned, this board can make a resolution that directs this board to say no pre through 5 will go above 27. So what does that budget look like? And that's a pretty bold move, but how bold are we? They would make, I know, I'm sorry, that's just the visionary in me. It's the naiveness in me. But we have the power to do that. And then, and that means that our high schools will be a little higher in number. And then I'd say, can we be even more visionary? This is really bizarre, but I would say, sometimes I think the classes that are the hardest to swallow for some high school classrooms is in the English department. So could you be creative in how FTEs are assigned, that if we make a commitment to not more than 27 in any pre through 5th grade and push the high school class sizes or middle school up a little bit, could you be flexible in some subject matters get more FTEs because of the nature of their paper load, and they get either an extra hour off, an extra prep. I know some districts do that in some of those writing and heavy paper classes, where at least maybe our middle school and our high school teachers could swallow a little higher numbers. There are some classes I taught that I could teach 45 to 50 just by the nature of the subject matter. And then there were other classes across our school building that couldn't be that high. So I don't know. I'm just trying to think creatively. But if this board is saying, or if Member Oswald is saying you won't vote for a budget that has that ratio in it, then we could make a resolution that makes our administration go back and redo a budget that is significantly uglier because we're committed to class size.
So actually my suggestion was going to be slightly similar to Jill's. Bill's like, oh my gosh, don't do this to me. But I think this discussion has been really enlightening because I want to continue our vein of recognizing what compensatory education dollars are meant for. And again, I think we are continuing to talk about them in reference to class sizes. And I think that what we heard resoundingly from the board was that they need to actually be used, and from our community members, is that they need to be used for the students who generate them. So I really want to be sensitive about how we're looking at some of these numbers and recognizing that the comp ed dollars are one piece of the equation, but kind of how are we looking at the whole picture? And if class size, I do not want to be the school board member who promotes having 40 kindergartners in a kindergarten class. So what I was saying earlier, remember Oswald, was not in opposition to what you were saying. But is this a public perception issue as well? And I know as a parent, I think, I go in the first day of school and I see 32 third graders in a classroom and I think, oh my gosh, that's too many for our kid, but is it really? So I think that there needs to be some larger education that happens, maybe community-wide around that too. But I think if we're saying as a board that, a couple of our priorities are the reallocation of compensatory education dollars, which we already voted on, and also maintaining manageable class sizes, because we also know that will play into teacher satisfaction, which is really important to us as a district. How do we kind of move around with recognizing those as being two of the pillars of the board?
I just want to take it to the next level. I really appreciate that you said that, Member Trenka, and I think that we need to look at what is underlying the implications of what we're asking for. Giving kids a smaller kindergarten class sounds great, but does it have any impact on their success? That's what I want to know. And the research shows that it doesn't if we're talking a few kids here or there. It has a public perception effect. And so we need to change the message around that. One, we need to educate people that class size isn't the entirety of their student success. In fact, it's pretty minimal in terms of how their student's going to succeed. But also talk about teacher satisfaction. Okay, well this is what's underlying. It's not about the class size. It's about making sure our parents and guardians are happy. It's about making sure our teachers are happy and that we're having students who are succeeding, all students succeeding. And so those are the underlying fundamentals we need to talk about, not class size.
I think the thing that I've always talked about is in this budget, my top two priorities, number one, 1A, taking another step towards equity, and I think we've done that with the comp ed decision. The 1B, school districts are called upon to deliver an adequate education, and there's many ways to probably look at it, but one way is probably classroom sizes, and certainly that'll be the popular public opinion anyways. What I'd like to know is, I don't know that we can get a firm grasp on what research tells us, but there's a couple other factors. Number one, I want to know what our teachers tell us. What do they think is a manageable classroom for K1, 2? And then there's another thing. I'm a nurse. I've worked in hospitals, and having a patient load of 8 on one day and 8 another day is completely different. It depends on the acuity of your patients. Now, not to apply that same exact logic of thinking to our students, but in certain classrooms, there will be more students who have fallen behind, who have more challenging circumstances, and in other classes there will be fewer. And so I think just getting a firm grasp on that and understanding that would be really helpful, and I think the perspective of our teachers would be huge in discussing this before we maybe come up with a specific resolution.
Go ahead. I guess I was just wanting to seek clarification on what it is exactly that we're asking. So if we're not going back to ask you to completely redo the budget, if we don't have, so I think what we're asking for is more information about specific to class sizes and some research around that. Maybe. Is that right?
Okay. There was a lot of points that I was like, oh, yeah. Please know that, I came to you as from a decade of being an elementary teacher. I taught first grade, second grade, third grade, and fifth grade, and sixth grade for a while. So I get the scope of what that looks like. I've also had everything from a classroom of 22 like 17 when I was at Nettleton to 32 when I was at Stowe. And you're absolutely right. It depends on the kids who are in the class, and it depends on it also depends on the teacher and their strengths and their areas of growth as well. And I will say that as a male elementary teacher, I very often had many students in my class who needed a good male role model. And so my class of 32 might be very different of a class of 32 that was next door to me, whose real strength was working with gifted and talented students. And our classes every year were different, but it's also where each of us excelled. And so I think if you had switched those two classes, maybe neither one of us would have done as well as the other was with their own class. I will say that I realized the other day, by the way, that this is my 20th year with Duluth Public Schools. So it's been 2 decades. And there's not very many of those years I know Jill just said, wow, he was in my class. There's not very many of those years in 20 years that haven't had reductions. Class size is important to me. It's always been important to me. It's one of the reasons that since I've come into this position, we have not changed class size once. We did change it once, and that was when the referendum was passed. We invested an additional $1.2 million in class size. Since that time, we have not touched it. We have reduced considerably the amount of support that teachers have around them. We have completely cut departments out of the district level. We have continued to reduce support staff, reduce district staff, reduce administration, and we have not touched class size. I hope that is evidence that class size has been paramount as we have developed the budgets over the past decade. This is not something that I recommend easily. We have identified $3.5 million of what I say is really these are all supports that teachers have, and I think part of the reason teachers feel that is that they do recognize that there's less support around them. There's less support from the district level, and the reason there's not more in it is because there's very few of us left at the district level. And so as we consider looking further at class size, at lowering it from where it is, I would say that there's not much left outside of that. In a quick glance at some of our class size numbers, and know that this is like just kind of back of the napkin kind of a thing. To get all elementary classes down below 27 would probably take between 25 and 30 more teachers, which is about $3 million just for the elementary. So I just want it to be known that that's a huge shift. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I'm just going to pass.
Since I've come out and said that I'm not going to vote for the 3.0, I'm willing to consider voting for Plan B, because I understand perfect is not possible, and yet this isn't anywhere near perfect, but it's a lot more evenly split than Plan A. Knowing that extra 20% is almost, I would say, in my mind, I personally believe it's almost guaranteed to be spent on staffing anyway. So let's allocate it for staffing and be done with it, and give CITs a more firmer number to handle. I mean, sure, some schools are going to have a windfall anyway, and the CITs are finally going to have some money to spend. That's not possible now. So they know how best to spend it, and I think this still honors that. And we still have the resolution increasing it moving forward. Our resolution that we passed didn't specify necessarily discretionary versus allocated. So I feel that this still meets our resolution that we passed, knowing that we're going to improve each year. I think this is the best we can do until we know about a levy and what our levy brings to us or not. So I'm comfortable with this. I love the dream of never having an elementary class size bigger than 27. I absolutely think that's fantastic. Someday, maybe when we pay off some red plan bonds out of the general fund, that's $3.3 million right there. Maybe. I don't know, but there's lots of different ways to get there, and that's a vision that we can hold and work towards. I think that's perfectly acceptable. Then we need a matching one for middle school. We need a matching one per subject in high school. Like you said, different classes have different needs. Do we start allocating FTE based on need? Do we determine every student's need and how the makeup of a classroom is? Those are wormholes of things I don't even want to touch. And I don't think it's possible for us to truly address that. But I just want everyone to know that I'm willing to consider the Plan B, because it just fits better and feels better.
So I've been schooled a little bit. I'll take it. You don't get, you don't make any forward progress if you're not bold enough to state some ideas. And I have been trying to learn the process of being a school board member, and it's hard sometimes when we're in this kind of formal setting. I want to roll up our sleeves, and I want to ask bold questions, and I just want to be told what I need to be told. I still am, the class size still confuses me in a way. One, I know you gave us documents as to what the class size is right now currently in Stowe, and you haven't.
Projections. Yeah.
Well, no, like right now, like currently, how many little fifth graders are sitting in the seats at Stowe, and how many do we have at Denfeld in all of our ninth grade English classes or whatever? I think we've got those numbers. I'd be still interested in looking at that, because it just seems like there's a breakdown. Like, the question that keeps coming to my mind is, so we've been plugging away at class size. We put discretionary monies, and we still we're still not managing class size. Why is that? Why is it that we keep putting money towards class size, but we still have too large a class size? Is it,
The ratios that we've used have been the same for the past 7 years. So technically, class size has remained constant for 7 years.
The ratio.
The ratio.
Which means what? Tell me what the ratio means.
It means mathematically, we have figured out how many teachers go into each building the same exact way for the past 7 years. It hasn't changed. The numbers haven't changed. Just the amount of discretionary funds that schools have available to them have changed because of reductions at the federal and state level in those funding sources. So title has decreased. I can't remember what percent off the top of my head, and I don't want to just throw one out there. Comp Ed has decreased. Achievement and integration, we have about half of what we used to have. So all of these extra funding sources that some sites have used historically to reduce class sizes or to add support staff, interventionists, things like that. That amount has decreased. But if you take the number of students and divide by that ratio number, that hasn't changed
What is that ratio number?
at all.
Do you want them?
Yes.
Yes.
All righty. At kindergarten, our ratio is 24.4. For grades 1, 2, and 3, for grades 1 and 2, it's 26.4. For grade 3, it's 28.4. For grade 4 and 5, it's 29.4. For grades 6 through 8, it's 26.1. And grades 9 through 12, it's 27.8.
So you take 200 ninth graders that are going into dental, you take dental's population of 980, and you divide it by 20,
7.8.
and that's what you give them at FTEs.
And it's most.
So then why do we have class sizes so short? I know because it's not even. I get that. I do. But
And it's a bigger issue in smaller buildings where the shift of 5 or 6 kids one way or another make it impossible to have one teacher, and so you have to add a second or a half, and it just the kids don't fall consistently year after year, grade by grade, building by building. If they did, it'd be easier to even out those ratios. But it's not, because there's an odd number here one year, an odd number there the next.
Yeah, Jill, I love your questions, and that's why I was so glad you ran for school board. But, and you know, one could say the reason why we are all sitting here till almost 7 o'clock now is because we know as public school advocates that everyone who comes in our door we're going to take in and we're going to keep with us as long as we can. And that's why we have sometimes the number of struggles that we have that other schools don't have. You know that. But I would love, not now, not for this budget to the extent, but I do think that community conversation around class sizes is important. Because I know, as I've been a school board member the last 4 years, every fall I'm trying to explain class sizes to the district I represent, because for lots of reasons. And so I would love to have that class size discussion. I would love us to do like some school districts have done and put a cap on, like we've kind of done for 7 years in some ways with the ratio. And that could be part of that discussion as well. Public schools have done that in other parts of the country as well as here in Minnesota. So, you know, it is a bigger discussion maybe for this budget, but it is a discussion we need to keep having. And I will tell you, new board members, next fall, when the first week of school rolls around, you will be having a lot of those discussions to try and explain class sizes and how they work and teacher ratios. Because especially depending on the schools, so.
I have a clarifying question about secondary building FTE allocations. What other staff must come out of those FTE building allocations that you described to Member Lofald? Like counselors, how many counselors do buildings get before they have to pay for their own out of other funds? That sort of thing.
I might have to lean on Peggy for this one a little bit if my memory doesn't.
Well, she hasn't done much today, so why not?
Oh!
I mean that kindly. I mean, I want to hear from you. Meaning, you know, I'm tired of hearing about these guys.
And I know I know you were kidding.
Thank you.
I do want to say that these guys have been working really hard with lots of different sets of numbers coming at them, and I think every time they see me coming in, they kind of cringe a little bit and say, "Oh no, what does he have?" But
what does he want now? Because we've come
We're in this together.
Yeah.
So, do you remember off the top of your head?
I think, if I remember right, I think at the secondary level, it's, at the high schools, it's 2 counselors. And everything else, I think, is teachers. Media is, one media at the, yeah.
I believe Ms. Sconnier's back there would like to shout it out. There's a free chair next to me.
No, I don't want to come up as 3. There's 3 counselors at both of the buildings that come out and 1 media specialist. So 4FT, which is 40 sections of classes, and that is in the ratio. So Julie, you were asking as far as the ratio, and the splitting is not, those, they don't have classes, but they are considered in the ratio as far as students.
So our 1 extra counselor is, because they're given 2.
I'm not sure about the 2, but now that our compensatory confidence, one of your counselors comes out of your discretion. Yeah, I think we provide. So provide 2 on our ratio.
But does 2 go into the class?
Having those numbers in a table would be really helpful for us as we're considering, then we can just like do our little rubrics.
How about our ADs? Where are they? They're not out in our ratio? No. Okay.
Those would be helpful as we look at staffing numbers. There's got to be.
Yeah, it's. I think the question is, what staff is there? What support staff is in place that's not counted in the ratio? I do want to say that on the staffing sheets that you will get once we build these. So I think if we just pull last year's funding sheets, that's all listed on those sheets that we provide. But you haven't been through that cycle yet.
Right.
So.
Yep, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So I just want to chime in there too, that I know more about ratios than I think, when I think about it, that was a question I certainly know. And I would imagine it's really hard when there's 32 fourth graders, because can we afford a second fourth grade teacher? What we really need, again, is that marketing to get 10 more students in, because then 52 fourth graders look a lot better at 25 and 27. But when there's 32, and I know that, and so again, I want to thank you all too for the hard work that we are going through, and I know, but even 32 in a fourth grade is enough for parents to, and then that's just a double-edged sword, because then if they depart or think about it, or then it's even worse. And but thanks, Rosie, too, for I think class size would be just an interesting next fall, or just in our back of our mind as we journey together, how we educate our community about that.
Yes, because, the 4 kids that might come in 2 days before school starts won't all fall easily into the grades we need them to fall. And that's, again, part of that education that we do with families, and you all will be doing probably this fall as well. 2 other things in terms of counselors, we are lobbying, and the School Board Association is lobbying on that very issue of more counselors in our schools. So, be thinking about that as you are running into legislators in the next few weeks. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is I do also just really appreciate, I know from going through this now for 5 years, the amount of work that you've done to get us to March 12th, and the amount of work you will still be doing to get us to voting for a budget in June. And so thank you. And I appreciate all the information you've been getting as we've been making requests. So thank you.
Okay, so along those lines, we're going to push through the rest of the meeting so we can get this staff that's been working tirelessly maybe home a little bit earlier than we were anticipating, so you can get some rest. We need those brains to be really active. So thank you all for that really robust conversation. I think we're on to expenditure contracts signed. So we're looking at page, oops, it just ran away, 70? Is that it? 70. The only question that I had on that was the money from the Zeitgeist, what is that for? Because it just says increase not to exceed amount 5 to 8,000. I mean, I think it's great, I'm sure.
Where?
I'm on page 70. The expenditure contract signed?
We have an agreement for some dance or some art, music.
The Zeitgeist Center for Arts and Community, $8,000.
That's an expenditure contract that was previously approved for $5,000 and is now, we are finding the need to bump up to $8,000.
What's it for?
Well, Bill Howes has signed it, so I think it's something about cultural dance and art in our elementaries.
We can go back and access that.
Well, as you're doing it, because I quickly looked at that contract too, and I couldn't see any names attached to it. Was I? Okay.
I know there's many partners through the Office of Education Equity that use it. Namely, I know the Our Poets with Daniel perform at Zeitgeist mostly weekly. So then that may be a majority of the contract, if not all. So, and they practice downstairs on Mondays and Wednesdays from 6 to 8. So if you go out the 3rd Street entrance, they don't mind you popping in to say hi. I do.
Okay.
And, those would be questions, I guess, I know we don't, but those would be questions too, that, is that in our budget for next year? Is that a one-time contract? Are we interested in pursuing it further? I've gone to some, I've dropped in. My question would just be, is that something we're looking to continue, or is that something that we would find not?
These would be items that were included in the Achievement and Integration Plan and their budget. And that's a 3-year plan, and we are on the end of the first year. And so two more years of that plan would be laid out in that budget. So you could review the Achievement and Integration Plan to see that. So William House Department that's grant funded, and it's all laid out 3 years at a time.
Rosie?
And would that be, I think Will is on our agenda for Wednesday. Would that be an opportunity to ask questions around it? Okay, just throw that out there.
Okay. Any other questions on the contracts?
I just wanted to point out to Member Lelefeld that that those expenditures are part of Bill House's thing, and it's not part of the unrestricted general fund, which was part of the budget that we're talking about. So it's a different fund.
Good clarification.
Thank you.
Anything else on the contracts? There was a lot in there this month. Okay. Facilities management and capital project status report. Anything there? I don't think so. Your reports are always so thorough, so I assume that if I haven't been enlightened about some sort of procurement for landscaping at Rockridge, then there isn't anything there. So I appreciate the thoroughness of your reports. Rosie?
No questions. I just want to kind of use this opportunity to thank Dave, thank you. Sorry, Dave. It was so exciting to have the Rockridge open house last Thursday in my district, or Wednesday in my district, and hear how the neighbors talk about what a wonderful facility, and to see it, and Jill and Kirby, David Kirby, thanks for coming. Thank you. It's really, I can't wait for you all to see it.
It was a very nice
Rockridge.
One of the things that, moving on the agenda, one of the things that I reached out to the superintendent about was giving us updates. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Spooner, I had a question. We see these work orders that are always being worked on with how many open work orders there are, and 557 work orders, that seems like a lot. What is the average time frame that we have from a work order being open to completion? I mean, some of these things obviously have to go on for months. So how are we efficient at it, I guess?
We're as efficient as we can be with the staff that we have. If it's a critical crisis work order, if there's a broken window, it gets fixed today. If there's a hole in the wall, it probably gets fixed this week. If there's a door hold open that maybe doesn't work right, it maybe gets fixed next year. We do as much as we can with the staff we have, as efficiently as we can with the budget we have, and that's the result that you see of the open work orders and the completed work orders.
So knowing that, and thank you for that explanation, that kind of puts it into perspective. It really hurts to see us cutting from maintenance and facilities. And I guess that's the way we can notice how our staff that we're missing and that we're not filling is critical to how fast we can finish those. And, those work orders are working on our brand new buildings that aren't so brand new anymore and need updating and fixing. And I'm really concerned about meeting the needs. I don't want to have to, in 20 years, consider tearing it down and building it new again because, we didn't take care of it. That's on us. So I really hope we can value taking care of what we have somewhere in our budget, because there's so many hands.
I was looking for one of the questions, and I noticed that Miss Jackie Dolans must be watching us online and has answered some of our questions. Perfect. So we do, in fact, I was terribly mistaken, publish the minutes in the DNT, a condensed version of the minutes, and I should probably have known that. I'm guessing that Jackie will let me know eventually if I sit here long enough. Yes, thank you, Jackie. And she has already created a data request tracking spreadsheet. So they are just on the spot. So thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
So efficient.
Maybe ask us if we needed dinner, but.
Okay, any other questions before I continue what I was saying before? I apologize, Member Oswald. One of the things that I asked for the superintendent to include on all of our business committee meetings moving forward are property sale updates and referendum updates, so that we're all kind of, I don't know about you guys, but those are two of the questions I get asked on a daily basis, multiple times, as I know do you. So that's why we're seeing them, sort of. I think the property sale one maybe isn't on here, but I know that you included it in your superintendent's report on Friday, that you have been meeting with the realtor who we've engaged with to start devising those strategies. So if there's anything of note from that meeting that you didn't include, if you want to share it, otherwise we'll maybe look for a little bit more meat on the bones for that conversation next month.
Yeah, we, Dave and Doug and I met with Greg Fulmer, and we're now kind of solidifying contracts between the two of us. It'll be a year-long commitment, unless one of us, for some reason, walks away from it, which will be all laid out in the contract. But I think once we have that in place, we'll have more information to share with you.
Thank you. Rosie?
I just wanted to note that David Spooner actually did mention in his update too about a prospective client was conducted at Nettleton. Was that a client looking at the property, or? Yeah, so there was a note of it as well in David's report.
We're attacking it from multiple fronts. And then the referendum update?
Yep, we have continued our conversation with Morrison Leatherman for the development of the polling. And so we've kind of given some of our initial thoughts. Think Kids will guide some of that work as well. in the 5 kind of topic areas that we've included in Think Kids. And so we are looking forward to, within the next couple of weeks, probably having some draft questions to look at and consider. I did share in my report as well that there is a community group coming together, and they invited me to share information about referendum and where we are in the process, and they asked me to kind of extend invitations to people in the community who might be interested. That is, I want to point out, completely separate from anything that the district does. It's a grassroots group that is seeking information, so my role is to provide them with information. You as board members can feel free to be involved as you wish, or to let other people know about the possibility of being a part of that group. So that's kind of where we are right now. Most of our time has been on the budget.
Right, and next steps with Morrison Leatherman are, what's the timeline on that again? You said they're developing the questions. You think you'll have drafts next week?
They'd be doing the polling in April.
Okay, thank you. Which leads us nicely into our last topic of discussion, which is the legislative platform, and some of the items that we've discussed, including additional funding and property sales, are a big part of what a number of you will be speaking about with our elected officials in the coming this week and next. So do you have any updates on that?
I did. I worked with Jackie a bit today. She had a few different models of a legislative update, and she did a lot of research too.
It looks great, Jackie. Thank you.
Did she send it out? I wasn't sure if she sent it out yet or not.
I think this is the...
Right. Well, I think this is even
okay.
nice, though, with the ties into what the proposed legislation is, because we didn't necessarily have that before. But
Yep.
Good.
And so she will update that. She has updates that come from MSBA, which I believe you received too through email, but also MASA and several different organizations. And so she will be working on tracking our legislative priorities, and then other things of interest that come up, she'll kind of put those in there too.
Okay.
And I know the next 2 days, I believe Member Kirby and Member Loeffler Kemp are headed to the Capitol with me and Tom Albright and Brad Beetz, and a pretty large group of students coming down as well. And then next week, I'm visiting again, this time with a group of superintendents from the Northeast Minnesota, all coming in together to talk about issues that pertain to education.
So now that Mr. Hassler is back in the room, what was the follow-up to Senator Simonson after the conversation that we had with him a few weeks ago?
I reached out to some other area stakeholders in that property, and specifically the city of Duluth. And historically we've had, not historically, but we did have at one time state statute that authorized a tax credit of up to $5 million for a contractor's supply of material costs. The question that Senator Simonson put to us was, is that a valuable tool to us as we're trying to get that property sold? And one of the challenges of a statute like that is it's going to be of limited time frame, limited duration. The development of that property is going to be pretty complicated. It's probably going to be taking place over a period of time, over phases. Probably would not fall within a given budget year. And in conjunction with those discussions with other stakeholders, we really believe that the best thing we can do is get funding to demolish the existing high school building on that property. Our estimate for the cost of that is up to $2 million. And so that is what that is what we have asked for. Don't know what our chances of getting that will be. There are some indications that at different points in time, some school districts from around the state may have been successful in getting funding support from the state for activities like that. But you never know until you ask.
Was there a question about maybe some tax abatement or some additional carrots to incentivize people to come in and develop on that space that didn't have a timeline of 6 months or 12 months that the senator was referring
well,
to?
Senator Simonson, and I forget the name of the state agency, but he said, there's a state agency deed, and he goes, would they have any resources along those lines? I talked to Heather Rand, and Heather, in her judgment, they don't provide those kinds of tools for a property like this, and that's why we came to the conclusion that the best thing we can do to make that property more marketable is to clear off that site, at least in part. Almost any development that we can contemplate happening on that property is a development that would not have use for the existing structure and would represent a cost for that developer before they even begin to develop the property in a way that's meaningful to them.
Okay, thank you. Member Leffler-Kemp?
Yep, I just, would you please thank Jackie for the work on this legislative update? And the one thing that would be really helpful is just where she lists the numbers, if she would put if any of our legislators are co-authors on there, that would be really good to, I know you can click on it, but it would be good to have that while she's doing the research anyways. So tell her thank you, but. And I can follow up with her too, but. Yeah.
I'm guessing. And I think the desire is to have ongoing legislative updates as well, not just as we head to the hills. Yep, on an ongoing basis, along with the property sales and the referendum updates.
I think I would be remiss if I didn't speak up about tearing down the properties on the Central Hill. I know that many of the community members out there were very supportive for a sale that the board did not endorse. And to have to spend actual taxpayer dollars to tear down the building to sell it is not going to go over very well. And I just want that to be known that I recognize that. And I understand my constituents that have told me they wanted us to sell that building and use it again, and recognize that the way we're moving forward, that's not going to happen.
We can agree to disagree on that one. Any other future items that we want to discuss, or are we comfortable closing? Thank you all. I know, again, we've all said it, but a big thanks to everyone here and those who aren't here who have been working on the finances, and for educating those of us who are going about this for the first time. We really appreciate it. Good luck to those who are headed to St. Paul this week. And with that, we'll close out the business committee meeting.